9T11 roller coaster. Our Day in the Light of Prophecy. I went to Loma Linda University down here near San Bernardino. After I finished with medical school, I did a residency. And then after I finished with my residency, I went out to Iowa to practice. The whole time I was in medical school and residency, I had my nose in medical books. I wasn't paying much attention to what was happening as far as current events, Bible prophecy, or things like that. And I started practicing. Well, then strange things were happening. Back early 2001, I guess it was, George Bush sent out the first economic stimulus check. How many remember that first economic stimulus check? Oh, how soon we forget. Not too many hands. And so that was sort of interesting. I started remembering in my mind a quotation. They try in vain to put business operations on a more stable basis. They were trying to stimulate the economy. And about that time, I had paid off my school debts, and I was trying to figure out, what do you do with extra money from all this medical practice? And I looked at everything. I said, the most stable thing is heaven. And so I was putting my money into the Lord's work. But the economics were getting worse. Things were happening, and then all of a sudden, 2 airplanes hit 2 buildings in New York City. I was in my waiting area. I was in my office. I was taking patients into rooms to examine them. But all my patients, all of a sudden the doors all opened up. They all came out of their rooms and they were glued to my television in my waiting area. As we first saw one airplane hit a building, and then a second one, and the announcers were talking about what's happening, Building 7 fall. And you know the whole scenario. And I was wondering, well, what does this have to do with Bible prophecy? And I thought it was kind of like we're on a roller coaster. And the roller coaster has reached the top of its height, and it has started to come down the long, fast stretch. And it's heading for everything that we have studied about as things that are going to happen in the end time. The fulfillment of Bible prophecy, the time of trouble, all the things that will be important to us. You know, we as Adventists have been people of prophecy. This has been our thing of interest. We started out as a prophetic movement. You remember William Miller started reading Daniel 8:14, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And as Miller studied, you remember he discovered that this time period started in 457 BC, and it extended for 2,300 years, a day for a year, to 1844. And 1844 became a very important date. They realized that something of a momentous nature had happened in heaven. 1844, an important date, a very important date. Let's make that our timestamp, let's say. 1844, October, 1844, October 22. Okay. You know when you go to the post office and you get some certified mail, they take a stamp and they put it on there. And it's got the date. Sort of like that. Time stamp. A date stamp. Time stamp number 1. Well, then we started reading the rest of the Bible and we discovered that there were important messages that would start happening in 1844 with this time stamp. This message is found in Revelation 14. And the reason we thought it was important is because it said the hour of His judgment is present tense come. And so we said, these are our messages. They all start in 1844. And so we must start preaching these. And there's 3 messages. And these are called the 3 angels' messages. They've been the hallmark of our church. Our church emblem used to have 3 angels on it. And this is because these are our messages. Well, I've got a question. If the time stamp, the present tense of the hour of His judgment is come, gave us a time stamp for the entire messages of the 3 angels' messages, then maybe we need to look at some other time stamps that might give us a current message for our time today. How about a time stamp that's related to the last crisis to be had on earth? A time stamp to when Jesus is going to come very soon. A time stamp to messages for our day in 2009. Let's look at the falling of these buildings, for example. You know, that was predicted. 9T, page 11. And the following chapter. On one occasion, when in New York City I was in the night season called upon to behold buildings rising story after story toward heaven. When this was written, there were no huge high-rises. The scene that next passed before me was an alarm of fire. Men looked at these lofty and supposedly fireproof buildings and said, "They're perfectly safe." But these buildings were consumed as if made of pitch. I remember that morning that those buildings were falling, and I was in my waiting area looking at the television. Tom Brokaw was the announcer we were watching. He was reading his teleprompter. He says, "They're telling me that these buildings can withstand airplanes flying into them." They were supposed to be fireproof. Very interesting. This can be our timestamp number 2, September 11, 2001. Well, the question then is, what else is in this chapter that talks about the falling of the buildings in New York? And it's very interesting what the title of the chapter is. The Last Crisis. How many crises are there after the last one? None. This is it. Oh, well, okay. And how would I know if I was in the last crisis? How about if the buildings fall in New York City? Well, what else is in that chapter? Well, let's take a look at it. You know, everything we have cliched about as Adventists is in this chapter. For example, this one here. Great changes are soon to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones. How many have heard somebody say that? Yeah, whenever we start talking about Bible prophecy and we see interesting things happening, we say those words. Oh, final movements will be rapid ones. Very interesting. What all is in this chapter? Wars and rumors of wars, calamities by land and sea, the unsettled state of society, the alarms of war are portentous. They forecast approaching events of the greatest magnitude. We have a number of wars going on. Here's U.S. News and World Report. 6 signs the U.S. may be headed for war with Iran. Wars and rumors of wars definitely going on. Look at this interesting chart. How many hours each country spends watching television? The United States average 8 hours. Wow. Turkey, 5 hours. All the different amounts of time that people are spending watching television. In this chapter, men have become infatuated with vice, and every species of evil prevails. What do we see on those televisions? How do they program our society? Back in the 70s, the Hollywood scene put together a program in which they featured a hijacking of an airplane. The airplane industry said, don't show it. They tried to get them not to put it on television. Undaunted, Hollywood put it on television. And within 3 weeks, they had 3 hijackings across our country. People do what they see on television. They've become infatuated with vice and every species of evil. And it gets propagated. More and more people are doing what they see. In this same chapter where the buildings fall, those who hold the reins of government are not able to solve the problem of moral corruption, poverty, pauperism, and increasing crime. Now, we don't have to watch too many newscasts to know that crime is not decreasing, but it is increasing in many different ways. Crimes, bold robberies are a frequent occurrence. Strikes are common. Thefts and murders are committed on every hand. Men possessed of demons are taking the lives of men, women, and children. Sad facts happening all the time. How about agricultural woes? In the same chapter are quoted some very important Old Testament prophecies. For example, Joel 1, 15 to 18 and 12. The seed is rotten under her clods. The garners are laid desolate. The barns are broken down, for the corn is withered. How do the beasts groan? The herds of cattle are perplexed, because they have no pasture. Yea, the flocks of sheep are made desolate. Well, this sounds scary. And if the sheep can't find food, how are we going to find food? And why are the seeds like rotten under the clods? They're not growing. Well, what's going on with these seeds? Have you heard of Terminator technology? Terminator technology. It's something that has been a subject of a lot of debate because of the implications. Terminator technology is this. They have discovered that farmers will save their seed. And if the farmer saves his seed, he can replant it. And then the people who made the seed or grew the seed or developed the seed are now not going to get any more money. They're not going to have any more income because the farmer can regrow their seed. In fact, my grandfather was a seed developer in Kansas. And he developed seed wheat, but he never patented it, and he never made people, not grow their seed. He just sold it to them, and then they grew their next crop the next year from seed they saved. And he wanted it that way because he said, the Lord gave it to me, I'm giving it to you. But these companies want to make sure you can't regrow their seeds, so they have genetically engineered the seeds so that they'll grow one season, but the next season the seeds are sterile. The seeds won't grow. And these seeds then, when you plant them, won't produce a crop. Here's a slide from a presentation made by a company to some of its employees, talking about their goals and what they're doing. Delta and Pine Land Company have pledged to continue to develop Terminator technology. They are testing its use on cotton plants. Several research bases in India are also researching the effect of the Terminator gene. Well, why do people see this as such a big problem? Why could this fulfill the prophecy that the seeds are all rotten under the clods? Well, it so happens that this technology, when you put some kind of genetically engineered DNA into seeds, it gets into the pollen. The pollen spreads, and it can spread to other plants. It can spread to other, and we hopefully not to plants out in the countryside. And so, does this really happen? Yes, it does. Let me give you an example. Back in 2001, do you remember that the Taco Bell company had to withdraw all its taco shells because there was some kind of corn in the taco shells that wasn't supposed to be for human consumption? It was called Starlink corn. Starlink corn had been developed for animal feed. They'd put peanut genes into the corn so that it would be especially nutritious for the animals. Well, this was a problem for people who had allergies to peanuts. And so people would eat the taco shells who had allergies to peanuts, and they would have a reaction. Well, so the government said, let's withdraw the corn. Let's have a recall, just like you do on a Ford Motor Company. If they have a problem with a car, they do a recall. Well, let's do a recall on the corn. Good luck. By that point, the Starlink corn had been everywhere, and the pollen had gone everywhere, and they couldn't recall it. Now, 10% of all corn has Starlink genes in it, whether you like it or not. And it's out there in the community. I mean, they are now growing different kinds of pharmaceuticals in corn. Well, where's that pollen going? So it's a very interesting problem. Well, what happens then if the Terminator gene goes out in the countryside and, this year's crop of grass is the last you'll ever see grass or whatever? I mean, there's some big implications here to what could happen. Other things that are happening with GMO, genetically modified organism, genetically modified foods. For example, here, we're looking at BT corn. What is BT corn? BT corn, bacterial toxin corn, is corn that produces its own insecticide. When the worm, the corn borer, whatever, comes and tries to eat the corn, he dies. And so it's a wonderful thing for the farmer. You don't have to spray the corn anymore, but Why would I want to eat corn that was actually insecticide? Why would I want my animals to actually eat the corn that's insecticide? And what are the implications? Down in Mexico, where the people live very near the corn fields, they've had a lot of problem with this, that the inhaled pollen from this corn causes all kinds of skin diseases and allergic reactions. Also, bacterial toxin, or Bt cotton. Almost all the cotton grown these days, especially in India, is this type of cotton. Causes all kinds of problems for the people working with it. Hundreds of laborers in India report allergic reactions to bacterial toxin cotton. Here again from India. Thousands of sheep died after grazing on Bt cotton plants. And here's a study from Austria. They learned in Austria by researching that pigs and cows became sterile after eating genetically modified corn. And did you know that almost all the sugar that you now get in America comes from genetically modified plants? GMO? Let's look at ecological issues as coming from this chapter where the buildings fall. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruited place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down. Have you seen these headlines? Millions of birds disappear. I saw one of those headlines. I looked at that and I said, now, is that true? How would I know if that's true? Who could I check that out with to make sure that that's really what's happening? Well, how about the Audubon Society? Wouldn't that be a good one? And that's where I looked. Audubon Society, here's their webpage, and they say, list of the top 20 common birds in decline. Northern bobwhite down 82%. Evening grosbeak down 78%. Northern pintail, and so forth and so on. All these birds that are disappearing. They decided to put together a new orchard out in Florida. They wanted to be one of the best orchards that they could put together. I believe it was peaches. And so they prepared the soil in the best way they knew how to prepare the soil. They put in a watering system that would water the trees in the way that the trees like to be watered. They got the best type of plants they could find for their trees, and they planted their orchard. And it takes a few years to get an orchard to bear, but the years were going by, and the orchard was not putting on blossoms. The orchard was not putting on fruit. The orchard was not getting ready to produce like they wanted it to produce. And so they brought in some experts from the university. Why isn't our orchard producing? They checked the soil. pH was good, the nutrients was good, everything was good, the watering system was all right, the trees look good. What's the matter? And then somebody paused for a minute and they said, you know, it's awfully quiet out here. I wonder where all the birds are. And somebody else said, yeah, you're right. Maybe that's the problem. And so they didn't import birds. They put in a loudspeaker system and started playing bird songs to the trees. And sure enough, the trees started putting on blossoms, and then they had their fruit. What are we going to do when all the birds are gone? What are some other issues in this chapter? Another big issue is the agencies of evil are combining their forces and consolidating. Well, we all know about the business mergers. I was listening to NPR radio. They were interviewing a very important financial advisor from Japan. He was talking about a similar mortgage crisis that Japan had back in, well, about 20 years ago. They had their long discussion, and then they started asking, well, what was the ultimate outfall of having that financial crisis over the mortgages? He says, well, before we had our mortgage crisis, we had 29 major national banks. After the mortgage crisis, we had 4. Business mergers, takeovers, binding in bundles. But what other things are happening where we have the agencies of evil combining? Have you heard of churches all gathering together? We call it the ecumenical movement. Let's all just get rid of our differences and get together. Here's from when the Pope was in Australia not long ago. All faiths must unite against violence. down here. I think you would agree that the ecumenical movement has reached a critical juncture, he told Christian representatives. We must guard against the temptation to view doctrine as divisive and hence an impediment to the seemingly more pressing and immediate task of improving the world in which we live. Don't let what you believe keep you from getting together. Ecumenical movement, combining forces. But what else? What else is happening? Have you heard of the 10 kings of Revelation 17, 12 and 13? Here it is. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings, 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength to the beast. Oh, what are the 10 kings? Well, let's look at some of this. You know, when the 10 kings all fall down in Revelation 18, it's all about economics. And they all wail. The merchants and the ships and so forth. They all wail because it all falls apart. Have you heard of the European Union? EU. We've had it around for a long time now, haven't we? EU sets the stage for economic recovery plan. The European Commission will present a comprehensive EU economic recovery plan in the late November. Well, we've known about it. It has its own currency, has its own government, it has its own structure. We had some friends up in Maine, Germans. Their mom and dad were moving in Europe. They moved from Germany over to Portugal. We said, well, how can you do that? I mean, you have to cross several countries and borders, and how can they just move like that? They said, oh, there's no problem. There's no borders anymore. It's all the EU now. It's all under one big block. But is the EU the only one? Have you heard of the South American Union? Been created. Have you heard of the Mediterranean Union? BBC News, it's been launched. Have you heard of the African Union? The African Union, or AU, is a Pan-African organization whose goal is to propel a united continent towards peace and prosperity. Have you heard of the Asian Pacific Union? China and even Australia is included in that one. How about the Russian Union, where they have the East Bloc countries? Euro-Asia Economic Community. All kinds of these are getting put together. Central American Union. Here we have the Korean-Japan Union. This is what the Club of Rome conceived of back in 1973 as the 10 regions of the earth. They've changed a little bit, but we have the European Union, the North American Union, the Central American Union, the Caribbean Union, the South American Union, Mediterranean Union, Asian Pacific Union, African Union, Japan Korean Union, and Russian East Bloc Union. 10 kings who have not power yet, but receive power 1 hour with the beast. How about the rich and the poor? The Bible talks about the rich and the poor. It doesn't talk much about the middle class, does it? There's the rich and the poor in the end. In the great cities, there are multitudes living in poverty and wretchedness, well-nigh destitute of food, shelter, and clothing. While in the same cities are those who have more than a heart could wish, who live luxuriously, spending their money on richly furnished houses, on personal adornment, or still worse, upon gratification of sensual appetite. The cities, the cries of starving humanity are coming up before God, while by every species of oppression and extortion men are piling up colossal fortunes. I was down in Omaha, Nebraska, looking for a car. I needed a vehicle, and I went to a dealership that sold the type of cars that I thought I wanted to drive. And when I went in there, an elderly gentleman helped me. He was the salesman. He was very nice. He knew his cars, but he was a little bit rusty, perhaps, on how the particular dealership worked. He kept going back to the sales manager and asking him questions. And I noticed that, and when we were through with our deal, I said, how long have you worked here? He's kind of hung his head a little bit, and he says, well, I've worked here about a month. I guess you could notice I was kind of new. I said, yeah. And then he started telling me his story. He says, I was out in Palm Springs, California. I was on the golf courses. Me and my buddies were in retirement. We were having a grand old time. And then Enron folded. And we had all our money in Enron. Now, we're back at work, and I'm starting at the bottom of the ladder. He said, I used to own 3 of these dealerships. Economic hard times. Interesting how this plays out. I'm going to put in a couple other quotes here. The centralization of wealth and power. The vast combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. The combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims. The spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed. The worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France in the French Revolution. Are we headed there? Very interesting. Another quote here: in India and China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. Have we seen that? And all the things we've had with the stock market, they purchase at low rates all they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. This means starvation to the poorer classes and will result in civil war. We're already seeing major protests in other countries over economic problems. There will be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation. Economic hard times. But that isn't the last word on economic hard times. In the same chapter as this little paragraph, the world is stirred with a spirit of war. We already talked about war. The prophecy of the 11th chapter of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Soon the scenes of trouble spoken of in the prophecies will take place. Well, what's in that chapter that we should know for our time? How about this one? But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Very interesting what we see happening. More financial things. They are struggling in vain to place business operations on a more secure basis. How many more economic bailout packages or stimulus packages do we need? And here we have a financial chart of the U.S. dollar. 2001, September 11, it went up a little bit, and then it's been down, down, down. And you can follow it as our dollar has decreased in value. Poverty is coming upon the world. Is it? And there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. Where does this lead people? What do they turn to? Look at great controversy. They want to restore their temporal prosperity. How do they do it? It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of Sunday Sabbath. That this sin has brought calamity which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced. And that those who present the claims of the fourth commandment about the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, thus destroying reverence for Sunday, are troublers of the people, preventing their restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity. The stock market dipped on Friday to the lowest it's ever been in the last 10 years. It's below 7,100. As we see the stock market go down and an economic crisis start to hit home in the places where we work, people will start getting agitated, looking for reasons to bring back temporal prosperity. In the same chapter then, we talk about this. Same chapter where the buildings fall. The worshipers of God will be especially distinguished by their regard for the fourth commandment. The wicked will be distinguished by their efforts to tear down the Creator's memorial and exalt an institution of Rome. Although church and state will unite their power to compel all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive the mark of the beast, yet the people of God will not receive it. We live in interesting times. The last crisis. It's like the days of Noah. Do you remember when Noah went into the ark? Had probation closed? Yes, when that door closed and he went in that ark, probation closed. Did anything major happen? Not for 7 days. For 7 days, things continued as normal. They continued like nothing had happened. Has probation already closed? Absorbed in worldly business and pleasure, the antediluvians knew not until the flood came and took them all away. Matthew 24:39. They had heaven-sent warnings, but they refused to listen. And today the world, utterly regardless of the warning voice of God, is hurrying on to eternal ruin. Eternal ruin. Jesus has left the word. Watch therefore, for you know not when the master of the house cometh, at evening or midnight, or at the cock-crowing, or in the morning. He comes like a thief in the night, does he not? Yes, he comes like a thief in the night, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And I say unto you, I say unto all, watch, be watching. Well, when is this time? What is this time referred to here? Is this his coming in the clouds? Not to the revelation of Christ in the clouds of heaven to find a people asleep, no, but to his return from his ministration in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, when he lays off his priestly attire and clothes himself with the garments of vengeance. And when the mandate goes forth, he that is unjust, let him be unjust still, the close of probation. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. We may not see any dramatic thing in our world when probation closes, but we know it's very close by the signs of the times. Also in this chapter, something very disturbing. Chapter 9T, page 11. It is impossible. Well, I don't like it when somebody says it's impossible. It's a challenge, right? But it's impossible. It's impossible to give any idea of the experience of the people of God who shall be alive upon the earth when celestial glory, that sounds good, and a repetition of the persecutions of the past are blended. We come to a time of trouble such as never has been since there's been a nation. How many people died since the inception of communism under the communist regimes? Conservative estimate is over 100 million people since they've been. How about under Hitler? How many people died?
12 million.
Yeah, 12 million. Lots of people. But this is a time of trouble such as has never been since there's been a nation. You read in the seals and in the trumpets of Revelation 6 through 9. You find all kinds of things happening that we have a hard time figuring. How could a third of the earth, suffer something and so forth? This all brings us to another thing in this chapter, and that is the shaking time. How many have heard of the shaking time? Yes, not just an earthquake, is it? The shaking time. Soon the battle will be waged fiercely between those who serve God and those who serve Him not. Soon, everything that can be shaken will be shaken. Does that leave anything unshaken? The final scenes of earth history, we have to sort everybody out between the camp of God and the camp that isn't with God, so that God can come and take those home who want to be with Him. That those things that cannot be shaken may remain. How many want to keep from being shaken? Yes, we don't want to get shaken out, that's for sure. What causes the shaking? Well, straight testimony. That definitely causes the shaking. Persecution and teaching temperance and health reform. All things that cause the shaking. Other things in this same chapter. Impersonation of Satan. Satan, surrounded by evil angels and claiming to be God, will work miracles of all kinds to deceive, if possible, the very elect. We see all kinds of healings. Here's the, healings you see on television. But some of the most miraculous things going on in our earth today are things surrounding the apparitions. And you hear all kinds of messages coming from these apparitions. And if you study the message, you realize that message is not coming from God. Then there's the time of trouble, time of Jacob's trouble mentioned in this chapter. Alas, for the day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. How many want to be saved out of it? We talked about that a little bit last time I was here, how to be saved out of it. Preparing so that you know where you stand in the sanctuary of God. Fearful tests and trials await the people of God. I don't like that idea. I don't enjoy trials. I don't go looking for trials, but I think it's inevitable, huh? Await the people of God. The spirit of war is stirring the nations from one end of the earth to the other. But in the midst of a time of trouble that is coming, a time of trouble such as has not been since there was a nation, God's chosen people will stand unmoved. Satan and his hosts cannot destroy them, for angels that excel in strength will protect them. I was reading in the book Maranatha. How many know what the book Maranatha is? It's sort of a devotional book on end-time events. And in one chapter, the author was talking about that she had a dream. And in her dream, an angel came to their house and said, come quick, gather your family, come with me. And she followed the angel, and they went through the city, and they went out through the woods, and then they went out through a big canyon up in the mountains, and then they came to a clearing. And the angel said, you'll be safe here. The time of trouble has come upon you like a thief in the night, and you didn't know it. Wouldn't you like to have angels take you to a place of safety when the time of trouble comes? Oh, yes. Well, but it doesn't matter where we are. We know that God will take care of us, don't we? He will take care of us. And the most important thing is that we know what the end of the book says. It doesn't just stop with trouble. It goes to some very happy things. I mean, if we were just looking at gloom and darkness, we'd be worried. But we know the end of the book says Jesus comes, He wins, and He can take us out of the situation. We are living in the time of the end. How many believe that? Definitely living in the time of the end. The fast fulfilling signs of the times declare that the coming of Christ is near at hand. Whoa, I look forward to that. It's kind of like escaping, right? Escaping. Got fear? What do we do? Boy. Got stress? Oh, what do we do? Well, we have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and His teaching in our past history. The more experience we have with Him, the more we can trust Him. The more we understand how He leads us, the better we will feel as the difficult times come. We have a valuable promise. There has no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful. Who's faithful? God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. Boy, that's comforting. Got trial? Here's something interesting. The Father's presence encircled Christ, and nothing befell Him but that which infinite love permitted for the blessing of the world. Here was His source of comfort, and it is for us. He who is imbued with the Spirit of Christ abides in Christ. The blow that is aimed at this person, him, falls upon the Savior, who surrounds him with His presence. Whatever comes to this person, him, comes from Christ. He has no need to resist evil, for Christ is his defense. Nothing can touch him except by the Lord's permission. And all things that are permitted work together for good to them that love the Lord. I remember hearing about an interview with a lady who was in Romania during the communist regime, and she had been persecuted. And they would beat her, and they really made her life miserable. And one day she was praying, and they started beating her. And when they started beating her, all of a sudden the glory of the Lord filled her soul. And it was like the beatings meant nothing. And she started praising the Lord. And the guards started saying, why are you singing? Why are you praising the Lord? We're beating you. She says, doesn't matter. I'm in the presence of the Lord. And I'm not feeling a thing. And they gave up. They quit beating her. And later on, when she recounted the experience, she said, I would give anything to be back in that position. I'd be anything to give anything to be back there and being persecuted, but being in the presence of the Lord, because it was so wonderful to be in His presence. Will the Lord take care of us? Amen. He sure will. So do you see why I call this the 9T11 roller coaster? It's like when those buildings fell, it was the mark, the time stamp for when the last crisis starts. When those buildings fell, we can start seeing all these things happening, headed for the time of trouble. How many of you want Jesus Christ to be your Savior during this time of trouble? Definitely.